Kia ora, good morning everyone, Richard here, welcome back to the channel. Last year, when I went to visit Viltrox headquarters in Shenzhen, I did an interview with their marketing director Mandy Lee, and she told us that Viltrox will be releasing a small, very affordable 20mm autofocus prime lens in the near future. And here it is. This is the Viltrox AF 20mm f2.8 Z lens. This lens was released for the Sony E mount a few months ago, and now the Nikon version has arrived. The price of this lens is only US $158, which makes it one of the cheapest autofocus native Z-mount lens you can buy in the market right now. I would like to say a big thank you to Viltrox for sending me this sample for this review, but as usual, this is a completely independent review. This Viltrox AF 20mm f2.8 Z lens is a very compact lens. The weight of this lens is only 173 grams for this Nikon version, and the size is only slightly longer than the Nikon 28mm f2.8 Z lens. If you compare it with the Nikon Z 20mm f1.8 S lens, this Viltrox lens is much smaller and lighter. So while I won't call it a pancake lens, it is one of the smallest autofocus lens for the Nikon Z mount right now. If you use this lens on an APS-C camera, that will give you 30mm equivalent focal length, which makes it a great everyday lens. The design of this lens is very simple. It is just a lens with a focus ring. There's no aperture ring, there's no buttons or switches, which is not really surprising considering the price of this lens. However, this budget lens feels surprisingly solid and well made. It doesn't really feel cheap at all. You can customize the focus ring to other features from the camera body if you want, just like a first-party Nikon lens. If you compare it with the Nikon Z 28mm f2.8 lens, which is almost double the price of this Viltrox, this Viltrox lens actually feels more solid and better quality. This Viltrox lens also has a metal lens mount, while the Nikon lens mount is made of plastic. To be honest, for such a compact lens, it doesn't really matter if the lens mount is made of metal or plastic, but having a metal mount does make the lens look and feels a bit more premium. This is not a weather resistance lens, and there's no rubber seal on the lens mount. But this lens does come with a reversible lens hood, which gives you better lens flare and also physical protection. This is another thing that is missing from the Nikon 28mm f2.8 lens. On the lens mount, there's also a USB-C port for firmware update. Viltrox has been pretty good at releasing new firmware to improve the performance and also address any compatibility issues with their lenses. It really wasn't that long ago when Viltrox released their first autofocus lens, but within just a very short period of time, Viltrox has already released dozens of autofocus lenses for the Nikon Z as well as Sony E and Fuji X mount. This lens uses STM autofocus motor just like the other Viltrox autofocus lenses, and the autofocus is very quiet. Face detection works as expected, and the autofocus performance is overall pretty good. The autofocus speed is decent. However, I noticed if I place the autofocus point near the corner of the frame, then sometimes the autofocus would hunt a bit before it can lock on to the target. This happens when I shoot photo as well as video. I don't find it a big issue when I'm shooting photos in real life, but I do hope Viltrox can improve that with future firmware update. For me to get some better idea about the image quality of this Viltrox lens, I went to see my friends at the Auckland Camera Center again and borrowed the Nikon Z 20mm f1.8 S lens to do some comparison. Now, the Nikon 20mm lens is retailed at over $1,000 US, while the Viltrox is just over $150. So the Nikon is way more expensive. You can buy 6 or almost 7 Viltrox lens for the price of one Nikon. So I don't expect the performance of the Viltrox will be quite on the same level as the Nikon. Another thing is that the Nikon is a f1.8 lens, so it's a bit over 1 stop faster than the Realtrux. But I want to use the Nikon as a benchmark to see how big the difference is between this Realtrux and the Nikon. Maybe the Realtrux give you excellent value for money, or maybe you really should just save up and get the Nikon instead. Let's have a look at my test results and we will decide. Okay, first let's have a look at the image sharpness, and as usual, let's look at the center sharpness first. The center of the Realtrux is very sharp already at f2.8, even when I compare it with the Nikon at f2.8, which is a very sharp lens. There isn't too much difference between these two lenses. Because of that, stopping down the lens doesn't make much difference to the center sharpness. From around f11, the image starting to become a bit softer due to diffraction. If we look at the APS-C corner, the Realtrux at f2.8 is not bad. There isn't too big a difference between the Realtrux and the Nikon. Stopping down the lens does help improve the sharpness a bit, but you would only notice the difference if you zoom in and do some pixel peeping like what we are doing now. Now we will look at the extreme corner. At f2.8, we can see the corner of the Realtrux is a bit soft, but to be honest, it's still better than I expected for a lens at this price point. Even when I compare it with the Nikon is sharper, but the difference is smaller than I thought it would be. Stopping down to f4, the Realtrux becomes quite a bit better, and at f5.6, then the Realtrux is almost the same as the Nikon. Focus at the corner instead of center of the photo only improve the corner sharpness a little bit. However, I notice if I focus at the corner instead of center, then the center of the photo would be out of focus quite a bit, which suggests the lens has a bit of field curvature. With this Realtrux 20mm lens, the minimum focus distance is about 0.19 meter, and that will give you 0.17 times maximum magnification. This is a photo I shot at the minimum focus distance. We still have quite a bit of distance between the front of the lens and the subject. Compared it with the Nikon's minimum focus distance is slightly longer at 0.2 meter, but probably because it has a very different optics design and the Nikon is just a much longer lens, so the maximum magnification ratio for the Nikon is slightly higher at 0.19 times. Here is the photo shooting at the minimum focus distance using these two lenses. The sharpness of the Realtrux is very good. You could get slightly better sharpness if you stop down the lens a little bit, but even if you are shooting at f2.8, the sharpness is still pretty good already. One thing I also noticed when I compare this close-up photo is, while the photos were shot with the identical white balance setting, the photo from the Realtrux is slightly warmer than the Nikon. It's not a huge difference, but I just like to point it out. For a 20mm f2.8 lens, you usually wouldn't dissolve the background too much, so bokeh is not that important to most people. But if you are shooting very close-up photos, you could still dissolve the background a bit. Let's have a look at this set of side-by-side comparison photos. I think the Realtrux bokeh looks pretty nice. Let's zoom in the background. Realtrux is pretty smooth. I would say arguably even smoother than the Nikon when shooting at the same aperture. In terms of chromatic aberration, the performance is pretty acceptable with this Realtrux lens. Most of the high contrast photos I see very minimal amount of chromatic aberration. This photo is one of the worst results I got, and if we zoom in, we see some color fringing at the corner. To me, the amount is still quite acceptable. Most of my other real-world photos has less color fringing than this photo. Let's talk about distortion next. If you look at this photo, for example, you can see there is a bit of irregular distortion. Look at this photo. You may not really notice it if you just look at the top of the photo, but if you look at where the top of the door is, you can see the horizontal line is not very straight. The Nikon is a bit better. but still not quite perfect, especially if you look at the top of the photo. Considering this is a very wide 20mm focal length lens, I think Wiltrox distortion is acceptable. But remember, these photos are after the lens profile correction is applied, and you cannot disable the lens profile correction easily if you are using software like the Adobe Lightroom. Looking at these two side-by-side photos, I also noticed the Nikon has a slightly wider field of view, but the difference is quite minor. When shooting at the maximum aperture f2.8, the Wiltrox has some noticeable light fall off near the corners. When you stop down the lens to f5.6, then most of the vignetting would disappear. The Nikon has a lot less vignetting than the Wiltrox, but just like distortion, these vignetting test photos are also with the lens profile correction already applied. Lenses from Chinese lens manufacturers quite often would have below average lens flare performance, but this doesn't really apply to Wiltrox, as I found their lenses usually have very good lens flare performance. And this is the same with this Wiltrox AF 20mm f2.8 lens. There is very minimal amount of lens flare even when I shoot directly into the sun. There is a bit of ghosting, but that's pretty much the only imperfection I can see. Contrast and colors remains great even when there's strong light source. However, while the lens flare performance is very good with this Wiltrox lens, there is still a bit of distance from the best lens manufacturers like Nikon. Look at this side-by-side comparison and you can see the Nikon is still a bit better when it comes to lens flare. Having said that, I am still super happy with the Wiltrox and I wouldn't really complain about its lens flare performance at all. If you want to get sun stars from this Wiltrox 20mm lens, you need to stop down the lens to at least around f8. The 14-point sun stars would become sharper as you further stop down the lens. The sun stars from the Nikon 20mm lens is better, but at least the Wiltrox is much better than the Nikon 28mm f2.8 lens. 20mm focal length is a great choice if you want to do a bit of vlogging video on a full frame camera. It's wide enough so you can shoot yourself easily and not have your face fill up most of the screen. And when you are shooting vlogging style video, the autofocus works very well as well. In terms of focus breathing, there is only very small amount of focus breathing, so you don't have those annoying zoom effect when you change the focus from close to far distance. For Nikon Z camera users, while the native Z-mount lens selection is getting bigger and more selection from both Nikon and third parties, there still are not that many choices if you want a compact autofocus lens. So this Wiltrox can be really attractive as it is the widest autofocus compact lens for the Nikon Z-mount right now. And since the price is just around $150 it definitely makes this lens even more attractive. Usually, Wiltrox lenses delivers good and recently even great image quality, but most of their lenses are also quite a bit bigger than average. This lens is so much smaller than Wiltrox's usual full-frame lenses, so I was not really sure what is the image quality is going to be like. Is it going to be good or bad? That's why I did the comparison with one of the best 20mm lens in the market, the Nikon Z 20mm f1.8s. I want to use the Nikon as a benchmark to see whether there is a lot of compromises in terms of image quality to achieve the compact size and low price of this Wiltrox lens. With all these different head-to-head comparisons I did, I think the Wiltrox does exceptionally well. It's not Nikon quality, but at this price and size, it just can't be. But looking at the test results in each area, the performance of the Wiltrox is just very solid. There's nothing wrong at all with the Wiltrox lens, and the difference between the Wiltrox and Nikon is a lot smaller than I expected. The only thing that I would really like to see Wiltrox improve is the autofocus performance, as I noticed there could be quite a bit of hunting and hesitation, especially when the focus point is placed near the corner of the photo. The autofocus is still very usable, and I also noticed similar issues with other third-party lenses like the Meike AF 50mm f1.8 Z lens that I reviewed recently, but I definitely want to see some firmware update from Realtrox to address or improve this in the future. But overall, for just around $150, this lens delivers exceptional value for money for Nikon Z shooters. No matter it's because you're interested in the 20mm focal length, its compact size, or just the better build quality than Nikon's own 28mm lens, or you may want a lens to do some vlogging video, you just can't really go wrong with this super affordable lens.